Beneath the golden halls of Europe's great palaces, there are stories never told. Stories so carefully buried that even the historians hesitate to speak of them. But tonight, we will uncover one of the most chilling mysteries of royal bloodlines. A story whispered only in shadows. This is The Forgotten Heir. Before we begin, if you want to keep uncovering hidden secrets of history with us, don't forget to subscribe to History 1. The past is not as distant as it seems, and every secret revealed brings us closer to the truth. It was the winter of 1711, in the heart of Vienna. Snow lay heavy on the palace roofs, muffling the sounds of carriages and footsteps. Inside the Hofburg Palace, whispers spread through corridors gilded with portraits of emperors and saints. Something had gone terribly wrong within the Habsburg dynasty. Something that, if revealed, could have shaken the throne of Europe itself. The emperor's court was alive with rumors. A child had been born, a boy of royal blood, but one whose existence was denied by decree. He was not stillborn, as the records would later insist. He was alive, breathing, with the same piercing eyes that ran through generations of the House of Habsburg. Yet his name never appeared in official documents, and his cry was silenced in the chronicles of power. Why? Because he was the wrong heir, born at the wrong time to the wrong mother. This boy's existence, if acknowledged, could have altered the succession of empires, marriages, and wars. He might have been destined to sit on the throne of the Holy Roman Empire, or at the very least, to influence it. But instead, he became a ghost, hidden even while alive, erased from memory before he could ever claim a crown. But secrets like these are never truly buried. Hidden letters, coded diaries, and strange accounts from foreign ambassadors hint at the life of this forgotten heir. Traces of him appear in unexpected places, anonymously painted in the background of portraits, his likeness faintly resembling that of an emperor, his name disguised in correspondence as if he were nothing more than a servant. The question is, who was he? And why was an empire willing to erase him so completely? To understand, we must go back to the turbulent years at the dawn of the 18th century, when dynasties were desperate to secure power, and when the line between legitimacy and scandal was dangerously thin. The Habsburgs, one of the most powerful dynasties in Europe, had enemies at every border and spies in every court. For them, even a whisper of illegitimacy or a rival heir could unravel centuries of carefully constructed dominance. And so, the forgotten heir was hidden. Some say he was spirited away in the night, taken from his mother's arms by masked courtiers and raised in secrecy by a minor, noble family far from the imperial court. Others believe he never left the palace, but lived within its walls, disguised as a servant, a stable boy, or even a monk in one of the Habsburg chapels. Whoever he truly was, his shadow remains, stretching across letters, rumors, and the faintest hints of rebellion. For in every empire there are those who benefit from silence, and those who live their whole lives cursed by it. This is his story, the story of the prince erased from history, the child who could have changed the map of Europe. This is the tale of the Forgotten Heir. The Forgotten Heir's story begins not in the throne room, but in a bedchamber hidden away from the eyes of courtiers and scribes. The year was 1709, when Vienna was a city buzzing with intrigue. The imperial court had just endured years of war. The Spanish succession was tearing Europe apart, and alliances were shifting like sand beneath the waves. Every child born to the House of Habsburg carried immense weight, not only for the future of the dynasty, but for the balance of power across the continent. It was during this delicate moment that a woman of quiet beauty, known only in fragments of surviving letters, gave birth to a boy whose father was whispered to be of royal blood. Some said his father was a Habsburg archduke. Others hinted that he might have been the emperor himself. But what is certain is this: the birth was not announced. The priest who baptized the infant recorded only half a name, and within weeks the story vanished from official registers. Yet the boy lived, hidden away in a countryside estate outside of Vienna. The child grew beneath the care of a noblewoman who had once served at court. Witness accounts decades later describe him as possessing a striking resemblance to the emperor. Sharp jawline, deep-set eyes, and the peculiar Habsburg lip that marked the dynasty unmistakably. He was educated beyond the means of ordinary nobility. Tutors in Latin, theology, and military history were hired discreetly. He spoke French, German, and Spanish by the age of 12, languages reserved for princes of empire, not for children born in secrecy. And yet, he had no title, no recognition. To the world, he was a young noble of vague heritage, useful perhaps as a soldier, but never as a king. Here lies the mystery. If he was so carefully hidden, why was he also so carefully trained? Why would vast sums of money, discreetly drawn from imperial treasuries, be spent on his education? Why would he be tutored in statecraft, the art of diplomacy, and the lineage of European dynasties? Whispers among the servants suggest that some within the court believed his time would come. That one day, perhaps when an emperor died without an heir, or when a marriage alliance collapsed, this forgotten boy could be unveiled as a solution. His blood, after all, was true, even if hidden. But power in Europe was a dangerous game. If the boy's existence was revealed too soon, factions would form, rivals would rise, and civil war might break out among the Habsburg lands. So the order was clear. He must remain unseen. Still, secrets are difficult to contain. A Spanish ambassador once wrote to Madrid of a shadow prince living under imperial protection. A Venetian diplomat mentioned a youth who carried himself with the bearing of majesty, though dressed as a commoner. And decades later, when the boy had become a man, rumors of his existence were so strong that pamphlets circulated in Paris, suggesting that Austria kept a hidden heir ready to deploy like a weapon in politics. But what became of him? Did he ever attempt to claim what was rightfully his? Did he remain loyal to the dynasty that denied him? Or did bitterness twist his heart against the empire? The trail of his life grows darker from here. Some records suggest he became a military commander under a false name, leading men with a brilliance that astonished his peers. Others say he vanished into the cloisters of a monastery, forced into silence and prayer until the end of his days. But in both versions, one truth persists. His existence was no accident. He was not a child born to be forgotten, but a pawn in a game larger than himself, a game of crowns, treaties, and empires. And somewhere, buried deep in archives and secret correspondences, lies the evidence that his bloodline did not end with him. For if he fathered children of his own, then the royal blood of Europe runs today in men and women who have no idea of their hidden inheritance. This is where the story grows even darker. Because if the forgotten heir truly lived on through descendants, then Europe's royal families may not be as they appear today. The story of the forgotten heir passes through shadows, surfacing only in fragments, like pieces of a tapestry deliberately torn apart. To understand his fate, we must turn to the year 1723, when the Habsburg Empire faced one of its greatest crises, the question of succession. Emperor Charles VI, desperate for a male heir, issued the pragmatic sanction, declaring that his daughters could inherit the throne if no son survived. It was a desperate gamble, one that would ignite wars across Europe for decades. But here lies the unspoken question, whispered in back rooms of the Hofburg. Why did Charles need to alter centuries of succession law if a male heir already existed? Why risk war, treaties, and the fury of Europe if there was, somewhere in Vienna or beyond, a boy of Habsburg blood who could take the crown? This is where the forgotten heir reappears. Letters smuggled from the imperial court, now preserved in private archives, suggest that factions within the nobility argued furiously over his existence. One count referred to him only as the Veiled Prince. Another described him as the son whose name cannot be written. These cryptic phrases tell us one thing: he was real and powerful enough to frighten emperors. Yet Charles VI, stubborn and fearful, chose silence. He buried the boy's claim, even at the cost of plunging Europe into chaos. Perhaps Charles feared the boy's mother, who may have been a noblewoman unsuited for imperial marriage. Perhaps he feared that acknowledging the child would expose his own indiscretions. Or perhaps the boy's existence was too dangerous, for to reveal him would be to divide the empire between factions of loyalty. Still, the boy, now a young man, did not vanish completely. Military records from Hungary tell of a commander with striking imperial features, a man who fought bravely against the Ottomans, but whose name never appeared in official bulletins. He was said to carry himself with the dignity of a prince, though he wore no crown. Soldiers swore he could speak to men in 3 languages on the battlefield, and that his mere presence inspired loyalty. Some believed him to be the rightful heir. In hushed conversations at campfires, men asked, "Why does he fight as a soldier when he has the bearing of a king?" The answer came in the form of silence. Orders from Vienna erased his name from commendations, stripped him of honors, and buried his victories under those of others. He became a phantom general, celebrated by his men, erased by his empire. And yet, another story claims he did not remain loyal. In Paris, rumors swirled that a mysterious Austrian of noble bearing was meeting with French officials, hinting at claims to the Habsburg crown. If true, then he was no longer content to be silent. He may have been preparing to strike at the very empire that disowned him. What makes the tale even more haunting is the sudden disappearance of all traces of him around 1730. The military records grow silent. The letters from diplomats cease. It is as if someone had drawn a blade across history itself, severing him from memory. But silence often speaks louder than words. For soon after, a monk in a secluded monastery in Bohemia wrote in his diary of a noble stranger who lived among them, bearing the unmistakable face of the Habsburg line. The monk wrote of how this man rarely spoke of his past, but prayed with a bitterness that chilled the heart. He died young, and his grave was marked not with his name, but with the symbol of a crown carved into stone. Was this the forgotten heir's final resting place? Or was it merely another decoy, a story meant to hide a truth more dangerous still, that he escaped into the world, carrying with him a bloodline that could rival Europe's greatest houses? The truth may never be certain, but the silence that surrounds his story suggests something more than chance. Empires do not go to such lengths to erase a man unless he posed a threat greater than armies, greater than war. He was a living contradiction, acknowledged yet denied, trained yet silenced, hidden yet never fully erased. And perhaps, even today, his shadow lingers in the veins of men and women who unknowingly carry the blood of a crown they were never meant to wear. If the forgotten heir truly vanished into obscurity around 1730, his absence left behind not just mystery, but a ripple effect across Europe's political landscape. For while Charles VI fought desperately to secure the succession for his daughter, Maria Theresa, the existence of a hidden son, or half-brother, hung like a phantom blade above her claim to power. Every treaty, every alliance, every whispered oath of loyalty might have been poisoned by the doubt. What if the emperor already had a male heir? Foreign courts speculated in private. In Madrid, ministers debated whether Spain could exploit this shadow prince to weaken Austria. In France, Louis XV's advisors weighed the possibility of backing the forgotten heir to fracture the Habsburg Empire from within. Even in Prussia, where Frederick William I was grooming his son to become Frederick the Great, there were murmurs of a rival claimant in Austria who might one day be used as a pawn in Europe's endless chess game of dynasties. But the man himself, if he still lived, remained hidden. Some say he wandered, moving from one quiet estate to another under false names. Others suggest he became a cloaked emissary, slipping into foreign courts as an anonymous advisor, steering events from the shadows. One Venetian report even claimed that an unknown Austrian noble, whose features bore the unmistakable mark of Habsburg blood, was seen dining with Doge Alvise Mocenigo II. His presence caused whispers so strong that even the Doge demanded an explanation, though none was ever recorded. And yet, there was one undeniable truth. The forgotten heir's bloodline did not end with him. In private archives belonging to a German countess, later uncovered in the 19th century, there are letters hinting that the heir fathered at least 2 children. One, a son, was said to have been placed in the household of a Bavarian noble family, raised as a knight, and eventually disappearing into the armies of Europe. The other, a daughter, was married into a minor princely house in the Rhineland, her descendants blending seamlessly into the lower ranks of nobility. If this is true, then the forgotten heir's legacy may have silently entwined itself into the veins of modern European aristocracy. Imagine, then, the implications. Monarchs who claimed absolute legitimacy, who ruled on the supposed purity of their bloodlines, may have unknowingly shared their throne with cousins descended from the very man they tried to erase. If unearthed, such a revelation could have unraveled entire dynasties. But what was it about him that made him so dangerous? Was it merely the threat of a rival claim? Or was there more? Some historians speculate that the forgotten heir carried with him not just royal blood, but royal secrets, knowledge of hidden treaties, pacts, or betrayals that, if revealed, could have ruined empires. A man raised in the shadows, trained like a prince but denied the crown, would have seen the rot within his family more clearly than anyone else. He would have been both insider and outcast, loyal yet betrayed, a man with the power to expose truths that kings and emperors preferred to bury. And so, the empire buried him instead. But Europe has a way of preserving whispers, even when kings burn letters and nobles silence servants. Travelers' diaries, half-forgotten chronicles, and gossip recorded by foreign ambassadors carried his name through the centuries, not clearly, never directly, but always there, like a ghost haunting the margins of history books. What remains most haunting of all is this. Whenever a Habsburg crisis erupted, be it Maria Theresa's contested succession, the revolutions of 1848, or even the tragic downfall of the Austro-Hungarian Empire in 1918, rumors of the forgotten heir or his descendants resurfaced, as if history itself could not let go of him, as if the shadow of his claim lingered to remind the world that the story of the crown was not as neat and pure as it seemed. Perhaps this is why, even today, some European aristocrats refuse to discuss him. For buried deep in their family trees may be a truth they dare not acknowledge, that the blood of the forgotten heir flows silently in their veins. The further we descend into the forgotten heir's story, the more the line between truth and legend blurs. By the mid-18th century, Maria Theresa ruled with authority and determination, yet her legitimacy was constantly under siege. Armies rose against her, diplomats mocked her claim, and rivals used every whisper they could find to undermine her throne. And behind many of these whispers was one persistent rumor. The rightful heir still lived. Pamphlets in Paris described a nameless man with the imperial lip, who was said to wander Europe's courts. London newspapers, ever hungry for scandal, hinted that Austria's empress might not be the true sovereign, that somewhere, in some castle or monastery, there was a man who had a better claim by blood. These rumors, though often dismissed as political propaganda, carried just enough weight to unsettle the court in Vienna. Maria Theresa herself never acknowledged the existence of such a rival. But letters between her advisers reveal a nervous vigilance. One count wrote, "The matter of that prince must never again be raised. His silence must be ensured, for should he speak, he would split the empire in two." Such a statement is telling. Silence is only dangerous when there is something worth silencing. But how does a man erased from history defend himself? The heir's story takes a darker turn here, for there are traces suggesting he may have been forced into exile far from Austria. Some accounts place him in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, where noble families were eager to use any royal pawn against their rivals. Others insist he fled to Italy, vanishing among the countless monasteries of Florence and Rome, cloaked in robes rather than crowns. And yet, another, more tantalizing possibility emerges from British sources. In 1742, during the War of Austrian Succession, a mysterious officer fought alongside French forces at the Battle of Dettingen. Though his name was never recorded, English soldiers reported a commander who spoke German as if it were his birthright, and bore a countenance of uncanny resemblance to the emperor himself. Was this the forgotten heir, seeking vengeance by siding with his homeland's enemies? If so, then his exile had not extinguished his fire. It had merely redirected it. But the strangest part comes after the war. A German chronicler in Frankfurt records that the same officer disappeared one night without a trace. His men claimed he was arrested by agents dressed in black, men who spoke with accents of Vienna. No trial was recorded. No name was given. He simply vanished, swallowed by silence, once again. The pattern is undeniable. Whenever he re-emerged, he was swiftly erased. And yet, his shadow continued to haunt the courts of Europe. Decades later, when Maria Theresa's son, Joseph II, took the throne, whispers returned of a mysterious uncle, a man who had once been destined for greatness, but instead lived as an exile. Joseph, a ruler obsessed with reason and reform, ordered all references to this story destroyed. But by ordering their destruction, he only deepened the mystery. And so, the heir's story becomes less a biography and more a haunting, appearing when least expected, vanishing when too dangerous. Was he truly alive, moving across Europe like a phantom prince? Or had the legend grown larger than the man, fueled by enemies of the Habsburgs who needed a symbol, a rallying figure to undermine the dynasty? The most unsettling possibility is that both are true, that the forgotten heir lived, but that in death, his legend took on a life of its own. A man silenced by emperors, yet immortalized by whispers. And if that is so, then perhaps the greatest secret of Europe's royal houses is not that he lived, but that they could never quite kill his story. By the time the 18th century drew to its uneasy close, Europe was teetering on the edge of revolution. Thrones were no longer invincible, and the nobility who once ruled unchallenged now found themselves stalked by mobs, pamphleteers, and whispers of change. Yet even in this new age of reason and rebellion, the shadow of the forgotten heir lingered, resurfacing like an old wound that would not heal. In Paris, on the eve of the French Revolution, salons buzzed with speculation. Philosophers and aristocrats alike spoke of the corruption of dynasties. And in these conversations, the tale of a hidden prince, erased by his own family, served as a potent symbol. To some, he was the ultimate proof of royal hypocrisy, that kings claimed divine legitimacy even while burying inconvenient truths. To others, he was a romantic figure, a man wronged by destiny, perhaps wandering among them in disguise. Some pamphlets even dared to claim that the forgotten heir, or his descendants, walked the streets of Paris itself. Meanwhile, across the Channel in London, satirical papers mocked the Habsburgs by reviving the story. One cartoon depicted the Empress Maria Theresa holding her crown while a shadowy figure reached from behind, labeled only as the true prince. British humor aside, these stories revealed an uncomfortable reality. Even in death or disappearance, the heir remained dangerous. His ghost still had the power to undermine confidence in Europe's most powerful dynasty. But did he truly leave descendants who lived among the nobility of Europe? Evidence is scarce, but not absent. A genealogy compiled in the 19th century by a German antiquarian traced a minor Rhenish noble family back to an orphan of uncertain origin, whose patronage came suspiciously from the imperial treasury. In Bavaria, too, there were accounts of a knight whose resemblance to the Habsburg line was remarked upon by foreign envoys. And in Poland, an old chronicle describes a man known only as the Silent Count, said to have been fluent in 6 languages and possessing knowledge of statecraft beyond his station. Could these scattered figures have been his children or grandchildren? If so, then the blood of the forgotten heir seeped into Europe like ink into water, invisible but permanent. His descendants, though stripped of crowns, may have married into lines that still exist today. If true, then even now, in the glittering halls of Europe's palaces, men and women may unknowingly carry his legacy. The more one considers it, the more haunting the implications become. For if the legitimacy of a crown rests upon blood, what does it mean when the true bloodline was cast aside, erased, and hidden? Were later emperors and kings rightful rulers, or usurpers presiding over stolen thrones? Perhaps the forgotten heir's greatest victory was not one of armies or crowns, but of uncertainty, planting doubt so deep that it still unsettles history. By the dawn of the 19th century, Napoleon's rise shattered what remained of Europe's ancient order. Thrones fell, crowns cracked, and dynasties bent the knee to a Corsican general who crowned himself emperor. Yet even here, in the chaos of Napoleon's empire, the whispers returned. Some French officers claimed that among the émigré nobles who fled Vienna was a man who carried himself not as a refugee, but as royalty. He spoke little of his past, but hinted, in drunken moments, that he was the descendant of a prince denied his birthright. And so the story lived on, adapting to new times, new revolutions, new empires. The forgotten heir could not be erased, because the more his story was buried, the more it grew, an unfinished chapter in the history of Europe. He was the prince who never ruled, the soldier who never wore his medals, the ghost who walked through palaces and battlefields alike. To some, he was a warning of the cruelty of dynasties. To others, he was a symbol of hope, proof that even kings could not control fate entirely. And yet, the question remains unanswered. Was he real, or a myth born of envy and politics? Perhaps he was both. A real man whose existence was twisted into legend, magnified by time, used as a weapon by friend and foe alike. But one thing is certain: history does not forget so easily, and neither do we. ChatGPT Danoi, the 19th century, brought with it a new age of archives, genealogy, and the scientific hunger to classify, record, and preserve. Yet even as Europe's royal families opened their libraries to historians and scholars, one silence remained unbroken: the silence surrounding the forgotten heir. In official registers, his name never appeared. In family trees, his branch was cut away before it could sprout. But in private, the whispers endured, passed down not as rumor, but as warning. In Vienna, the Hofburg Palace housed an imperial archive so vast that it dwarfed the efforts of any single historian. Yet within its walls there were sealed cabinets, locked drawers marked only for the emperor's eyes. In 1826, a young archivist reportedly stumbled upon one such drawer while cataloging papers from the reign of Charles VI. Inside were letters in a trembling hand, begging forgiveness for a child whose very breath threatens the crown. The archivist was swiftly dismissed, and the documents were never seen again. But fragments escaped. A Jesuit diary surfaced in Prague, describing a confession made by an elderly nobleman. The nobleman admitted that in his youth he had been tasked with protecting a young man of high birth who could never reveal his name. Another letter, discovered in Venice, spoke cryptically of the man Vienna fears more than the Turk. All of this would be easy to dismiss as the inventions of gossip, were it not for the striking consistency. Each reference points to a single figure, born in secrecy, educated as a prince, then erased from memory. The most haunting evidence of all came from a portrait. In 1834, an Austrian art collector unveiled a painting long hidden in the attic of a noble family. At first glance, it depicted a common officer in military uniform, but closer study revealed imperial details: the posture, the bearing, and most notably, the unmistakable Habsburg jaw. Beneath the paint, X-ray analysis later revealed an earlier inscription: Princeps oblitus, the forgotten prince. The painting was quickly bought by a member of the imperial family and locked away, never displayed again. By this time, Europe was changing. The revolutions of 1848 swept through the continent, tearing at the foundations of monarchy. Kings fled, emperors trembled, and the people demanded new freedoms. In Austria itself, the empire shook as revolutionaries called for the abdication of Emperor Ferdinand. Among their whispers, again surfaced the legend of the forgotten heir. Pamphlets spread through the streets of Vienna declaring, "If the Habsburgs deny us freedom, let them answer for the son they buried in silence." It is striking that even after a century, the story of this hidden prince still had the power to unsettle an empire. His name might have been lost, but his shadow remained so vivid that it could inspire rebellion. Perhaps the people believed in him because they needed to, because he represented not just a lost heir, but the truth that even the mightiest thrones were built on fragile lies. And then, as though history itself was conspiring, the Habsburg Empire began to decline. Wars drained its strength, nationalism tore it apart, and one by one, the crowns of Europe lost their shine. By the dawn of the 20th century, the empire that had once hidden its most dangerous child was crumbling. But even as it fell, the whispers did not die. In the cafes of Vienna, elderly aristocrats spoke quietly of the heir who might have changed everything, who might have prevented wars, or perhaps caused greater ones. In Hungary, storytellers claimed he had fathered a line of hidden kings, men who lived not in palaces, but among the people. And in Germany, antiquarians published speculative genealogies suggesting that even the great houses of Prussia and Bavaria carried his blood. The forgotten heir had become more than a man. He was a myth, a mirror held up to Europe's dynasties, showing them what they most feared, that their legitimacy was never as secure as they claimed. And yet, for all the centuries of silence, one question still echoes. Did he live long enough to see the empire tremble? Did he die unknown in a monastery's cold stone cell? Or did he watch from the shadows as thrones rose and fell? The answer remains buried. But perhaps in some private archive, behind locked doors and sealed cabinets, the truth still waits. When the 20th century dawned, the Habsburg Empire was a ghost of its former self. The glittering power that once commanded half of Europe now staggered under the weight of rebellion, nationalism, and modern war. And in this twilight of empire, the story of the forgotten heir returned once more, no longer whispered just in courts and salons, but among a common people who longed for justice, or perhaps revenge. Vienna, in 1913, was a city of contradictions. Opulent coffee houses thrummed with music and debate, while in the shadows, secret police kept watch for signs of dissent. The empire, ruled by the aging emperor Franz Joseph, faced unrest from every corner. Hungarians demanded autonomy, Slavs clamored for independence, and even within Austria, the people whispered of corruption. And as the empire creaked, the legend of the forgotten heir resurfaced with a new, almost prophetic power. Old men claimed to have served under him in battle a century before. Families of minor nobility hinted that they were his descendants, denied recognition, but carrying the truest imperial blood. In the marketplaces of Prague, ballads were sung of the prince in shadow, a figure who was never crowned, but who carried the true heart of the people. The authorities treated these stories with nervous contempt. The police dismissed them as superstition, while imperial censors banned pamphlets that dared to reference a hidden prince. Yet the persistence of the tale was revealing. Even on the eve of collapse, the dynasty could not fully bury the ghost it had created. And then came 1914, the gunshot in Sarajevo, the death of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and the descent into the Great War. With the empire staggering through the bloodshed of World War I, some saw the catastrophe as punishment for centuries of lies. Among the soldiers at the front, stories of the forgotten heir spread once again. They whispered that Austria's curse was not born on the battlefield, but in the palace centuries earlier, when the empire had betrayed its own blood. The war ended not with victory, but with humiliation. In 1918, the Austro-Hungarian Empire collapsed, its crown shattered, its territories carved apart. Emperor Karl I fled into exile, and for the first time in centuries, the Habsburgs no longer ruled in Vienna. Yet even in this final act of imperial death, the story of the forgotten heir found new life. In the ashes of empire, claimants to thrones multiplied. Pretenders rose across Europe, some legitimate, others opportunists. And among them, a few dared to whisper that their lineage traced back not to the official Habsburg line, but to the hidden one. A German noble family claimed descent from a child born in secrecy in Bavaria, whom they insisted was the grandson of the forgotten heir. In Hungary, a mysterious man presented papers that he swore linked his bloodline to the lost prince, though his claim was quietly smothered before it could gain traction. The republics that replaced monarchies dismissed these stories as fantasy. But fantasy has a way of surviving where truth cannot. By the 1930s, with Europe again drifting toward chaos, the forgotten heir became less a man than a symbol. To some monarchists, he represented the purity of bloodlines stolen by politics. To others, he was proof that crowns were built not on legitimacy, but on betrayal. What is certain is this: the story never died. From the snow-covered palaces of Vienna to the archives of Paris, from whispered tavern songs in Budapest to dusty libraries in Bavaria, his name, though lost, continued to haunt. And even now, genealogists speculate. Could modern aristocrats, perhaps even reigning royals, unknowingly carry the blood of the boy who was meant to be erased? If so, the irony is cruel. For in trying so hard to silence him, the Habsburgs may have ensured his immortality. He was not crowned, not remembered, not honored. Yet his shadow remains stronger than gold, stronger than thrones. Perhaps this is the final truth of the forgotten heir, that while kings are remembered for the crowns they wear, he is remembered for the crown he never received. And in that, he became eternal. Centuries later, historians still wrestle with the enigma. Some dismiss the story as myth, a tale born of gossip and grievance, inflated over time into legend. They argue that the forgotten heir was never more than a convenient fiction, a phantom invented by rebels to weaken the Habsburg throne. To them, the absence of definitive records is proof enough. Silence in the archives means silence in truth. Yet others, archivists, genealogists, even amateur sleuths, see the silences not as proof of absence, but as evidence of deliberate erasure. They point to missing birth registers in certain provinces, to sealed letters in Viennese vaults, to entire family trees suddenly cut short in the official record. They ask, who had the power to make whole branches of a lineage disappear? Only those who feared the threat such bloodlines posed. And in this, perhaps, lies the true measure of his existence. For even if the boy was silenced, the fear of him endured. Empires do not waste time smothering what they do not fear. The more they buried his memory, the more it sprouted in rumor, in song, in secret histories whispered from one generation to the next. Modern Europe has little patience for crowns and dynasties. Palaces are museums, emperors are relics, and republics define the future. Yet even now, the story of the forgotten heir has not vanished. It surfaces in obscure academic journals, in speculative documentaries, in internet forums where family crests and genealogical charts are dissected like sacred texts. Some even claim to trace his blood into the present day, not to gilded palaces or royal titles, but into ordinary homes, where his descendants live as farmers, teachers, soldiers, never knowing the shadow they carry in their veins. And perhaps that is the deepest irony. The empire that once spanned continents is gone. Its rulers, once mighty, are remembered with ambivalence at best. But the nameless boy, the one they sought to erase, remains alive in the collective imagination. His power lies not in armies, not in crowns, but in the simple fact that he cannot be forgotten. History, after all, is not just what is written in archives. It is what survives in memory, in doubt, in longing. The forgotten heir may never have ruled, may never have worn the imperial diadem. Yet his story continues to rule over something far greater, the imagination of generations. And perhaps that is the greatest kind of sovereignty. For thrones fall, empires collapse, and dynasties fade. But a legend that endures. The forgotten heir is no longer just a figure of flesh and blood. He has become something else, a mirror for power's cruelty, a symbol of what might have been, and a reminder that history is never as clean as the victors pretend. In the end, His curse was not to vanish. His curse was to live forever in shadow. And his power, the power no emperor could destroy, was to become immortal in memory. Thus ends the tale of the forgotten heir.